you want to change, now is the time to know about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned this, but about the groups.
Sorry?
About like the groups afterwards. I was wondering if we could have like a rotation, like have different people supervise.
Right.
We would add a lot.
Okay. We're thinking about that. There's some pluses and some minuses, but it's under discussion. I understand the point. Right. Not certainly. We'll figure it out. Anything else? Okay, so the format will continue as we've been going. Now, there was a question, and I think it's important for you to realize this. There was one comment on the blog about the fact that we haven't been discussing diagnosis, and we haven't been discussing medication. And the reason for that is that this is a course on theory of family therapy, and it's a preclinical course. The idea of this course is to give you, as I told you, the building blocks to think about things. There will be a course on psychopathology, probably in the third year, and parallel to the course on psychopathology, I'll be teaching another course on more difficult families, and we'll coordinate those courses so that anything that needs to be discussed about medication and about how you integrate medication into family therapy, we'll talk about that. So hold your breath. If there are specific questions, that's what the blog is for. But it'll be coming, but not this year. I do want to tell you that next week I won't be here to introduce Esther Chapman. You have a real treat. You have a very experienced family lawyer coming in to talk to you for 4 weeks, double sessions, and that'll give you a complete introduction to Israeli family law as it affects children. Since you've been learning about children, now you're going to learn how Israeli law talks about children. Then you're going to have 2 semesters on couples, and after the second semester on couples, in the middle of the year next year, Esther Shalan will be back to talk to you about family law, about divorce, and custody issues. So we're trying to integrate that, but that'll be starting next week. Please try to come on time. There's a lot to learn. Yeah.
Do you know what the format's going to be with her? Because the thought of 4 hours, I'm just curious because it seems intimidating.
Right. She's a very experienced lecturer, and you're not going to sit for 4 hours and do nothing. But we're going to leave it to her with you to figure out just exactly how to do breaks and what to do. We hope to have a reader printed to hand to you, and a lot of online materials that you can get. So the course is pretty much prepared, but how exactly it's going to run, the truth is that I, as the director of the course, don't like to tell other people how to do things. They usually can figure it out themselves. Where we did it her way, I do it my way. There isn't only one way, but we like to have some diversity, so I can't tell you. But we'll find out.
Okay.
I do apologize, I won't be here. There's a staff retreat next week, so I won't be here to introduce her to you. I had asked before, just as we started, if there's any more comments about evaluation of this course before we go on. About the forms, we went over them. If there's any more comments about evaluation, this is the time to do that before we go on with finishing the last material. Okay, well, feedback is mutual. I have the impression from teaching you, first of all, that it's a lively class. In other words, it's for a lecturer to meet a group like you is a pleasure. People are listening, people are thinking, people are asking questions. So from that point of view, which is the dominant part of the course, the dominant part is what we do here. I can say that I'm very pleased with you. This is all an experiment from both sides, and I think that you become a good learning group. And you'll be a better learning group the more you read, I understand that in Hoffman is a difficult text, but there isn't another text that gives you the pieces in a clear way. And so I am encouraging you, because I see that some people have yet to do the reading. Sometimes you may do the reading after the lecture. As you see, the lectures don't tend to be, what did you read and how did you understand it? Because I don't think it's that kind of reading. But the idea of the lectures is to give you enough of a basis to be able to go ahead and read, but it's not instead of reading. And this is the last time I'll nudge you about the blog. You'll be a more coherent learning group the more you use that. Okay, so we're going to go back and revisit the Bryce family again. And we're going to review something that we talked about 2 times ago, and then proceed to see how this fits with what's called structural family therapy. You remember them all. Now, let's take Claudia, the problematic teenager, and let's have her ask, how does my father, David, how does David feel towards me? You can figure that out in a dyad, right? And then we say, all right, well, how does David feel towards me? And then I have a relationship with Mom. How does David feel about my relationship with Mom? We're getting more complicated, right? This is where you start to do the one turn of the loop. And if Claudia wants to say, okay, I'm fighting with Mom all the time, right? And the dad seems to be okay with me, but how does he think about my fighting with Mom? That's not so simple, because he might be thinking that I would like you two to get together and be and solve your problems, or he might be thinking that the more you fight with Mom, the closer you are, the more you need me. Even if I'm silent, but the more you need me. I don't know. That's a question, right? And with that question, you end up with a triangle that's not yet stable. And then we go to the next level, which is the way that I feel about Dad's relationship with Mom. David and Caroline are kind of disconnected. They don't seem to work well together. They're not fighting a lot, but they seem to be not so well connected. Now, how do I feel about the fact that Dad and Mom don't get along so well together? But not only what do I feel about it, but how does David feel about what I feel about his relationship with Caroline? You see? And so now we've run two turns of the wheel, and the family has become unstable. It's unclear how that works. But if you recall, if we create a stable triangle, the stable triangle is the one where there's one side that's positive and 2 sides that are negative. And you'll see how this now solves all the questions. How does David feel towards me? Positive in a sort of way that I feel sorry for my daughter because she has such a miserable mother. But it's clear, right? And my relationship with Caroline is adversarial. How does David feel about my relationship with Caroline? He favors the fact that it's adversarial. He makes up for it, so he's not against it being adversarial. My relationship with him gets stronger as I'm having trouble with Mom. Now, what do I feel about David's relationship with Caroline? I benefit from it, right? See, you have this stable triangle. The fact that there's a negative here, for Claudia, it's clear that for her, there's a benefit. The less that David and Caroline get along, the more I have a relationship with Dad. That depends on his not getting along with Mom. So we've solved that one. And then, how many times we go over it, we'll be able to solve it. The fact that I benefit from Dad's bad relationship with Mom, how does Dad feel about that? Good, right? Because he's a partner, he does the same thing. So if you would say, well, how does David feel about my relationship with Mom? And how does Carolyn feel about David's feeling that way about my relationship with Mom? She hates it. Okay, so there are no questions. That's one way of looking at the why a stable triangle is a stable triangle. In the book, you'll read about the stable triangle. This is another way of looking at it relationally, to see that not understanding relationships is unstable, and that people tend, if you talk about this triangle as being stable, is it a triangle that's connected to regulation or to intersubjectivity? Say no, no. Okay. It's regulation. All these kinds of triangles are regulatory. They stabilize. Stabilizing things is regulatory. Intersubjective is always destabilizing. Intersubjective always asks all of these questions and tries to solve the answers. But the answers are given before the question. That makes it stable. That's the regulation of the triangle. Now, what kind of triangle is it? It's a stable triangle. And there's another word for it that you've learned. It's what's called the perverse triangle. Why is it a perverse triangle? Because it crosses hierarchical lines, right? And generally speaking, what you'll find in families, most of the time, is that a stable triangle will also be a perverse triangle. In other words, the perverse triangle is a stable triangle because there's one positive and one negative. You remember we used as an example the family that we all know of, Yitzchak, Rivka, and Yaakov. And that was a perverse triangle. It's also a stable triangle. It's clear where the bond is. The bond is with Rivka and Yaakov. The one thing we don't know is what about the relationship of Rivka and Yitzchak? That's left out of the information. So we just imagine it for our own uses, not to understand the Bible. So what you generally find in families is that you'll have a perverse triangle that's stable and a stable triangle that's perverse, right? Now, that keeps the family together. We're not against regulation here. It's not as if we say, whoa, this is a family that shouldn't be that way. No, 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 you can't do that. This is a bad thing to do. You have to open up your triangles. You see that it keeps the family together. Unhappy, but together. That's what regulation does. It sort of frees a certain level of misery and doesn't take chances with things falling apart. Everybody's miserable in the Christ family until they come for therapy, then they get more miserable until they get to solve it. Now, if we look at the Minuchin's terms, what you'll find is that all three of the terms that we're now going to review, they all open up the perverse triangle. So in other words, they destabilize what's happening in the room. Let's have a look at it. So, you see, for example, the first concept that we took with Minuchin is a hierarchy. So you say Claudia is a big problem with hierarchy. She doesn't listen to anybody, right? But if we want to take the Grice family and have them work on hierarchy, right? Hierarchy is that Claudia has to listen to both her mother and her father, right? Because if she's listening to her father but not her mother, we have a problem of hierarchy. The hierarchy is both parents up there. And the way we would do that, there are plenty of tapes if you want to watch Minuchin seeing it. The way that we would do that is we would say, Claudia, sit. Usually what the therapist does is if the person is most challenged, you sit with the person who's challenged and position the other two people to talk to each other. So if, let's say, the therapist is sitting here between David and Caroline, right? So what he would do is to say, I'm sitting here, but David, could you switch seats with me? Minuchin is the one who changes the seats all the time. You sort of redirect the drama. He says, look, David, how about if you switch seats with me, and then I'm going to stay close to Claudia here, and the two of us are going to watch the two of you make a plan for what is the punishment when she comes home at 2 in the morning, what is the punishment for 3 in the morning, what is the punishment for 4 in the morning. Let's try to figure it out. So then what you're doing is asking the hierarchical couple to work together, right? So you're creating a hierarchy, And since Claudia has the most to lose, she has the most to gain also, but she has the most to lose, at least from the way she sees it, from having the hierarchy work. So the therapist sits with her and asks the couple to work. But you see what happens when you do that? You're reinstituting, you're breaking up the perverse triangle. By using hierarchy, you're thinking about not just the triangle. You're thinking about hierarchy of 5 people in this family, not of 3. But when you do it, you always break up the perverse triangle. So Minuchin's moves, which are not based on triangles, end up doing to the perverse triangle what we want to do if we wanted to work just on the triangle. Okay? So far, so good? Okay. Now let's work on subsystems, right? And if you recall, what we said last time was that the core of Minuchin's system is the subsystem, because the subsystem has a function, and the subsystem needs to have its function protected, and the function of the subsystem is protected by the hierarchies and by the boundaries. So you ask about hierarchy, and you ask about boundaries, which we'll get to next. Are they making the subsystem work? But let's take the subsystem. So we say, well, David and Caroline are both an executive subsystem as parents, and they're a spouse subsystem as a couple. Let's take the spouse subsystem, since essentially when we talked about the hierarchy, what we really did is say, you guys are an executive subsystem, work, make it work. And what we did is we took Claudia out of it and asked for that subsystem to work. But let's take the spouse subsystem for a minute. I think clinically you would do that. Clinically, in order to take the child who's in the perverse triangle out, you work with the parental subsystem first, before the spouse system. But just for example, I put myself in the same place here. I say, David, switch places with me. And then I say to the 2 of them, you know, what is it that you could be doing at 2 in the morning if you weren't talking about Claudia, right? Let's say that Claudia was home, she was in her bed, you're in your room. You guys like to be in your own room? You find it to be a place where you can become close to each other. That's not talking about the parental subsystem, that's talking about the spouse system. Because what Claudia has done is essentially erased the night of her parents, which means that she's intruding, impinging on their intimacy. Now, if they have a problem with intimacy, they've probably been inviting her to bother them, so that instead of saying, we don't really like being here, they can say, oh, you go about what's happening to Claudia. Now, obviously, in a Haredi family, when you wouldn't say, okay, David, switch seats with me, I'm going to sit with your kids and you're going to talk about how you make love to your wife. They're not going to do that in a Haredi family. That's what people did in California. That's what people did in the first generation in New York. And the idea behind it, which you'll read in family therapy, is that how are children learning about intimacy? Because their parents share with them something about the intimacy between the husband and wife. You're not going to do that, are you? Right? So you'll find a different way to do it, which is part of what we're going to figure out here. In other words, how the issue of intimacy between a couple isn't going to be discussed in the room, but that's what families teach each other. How do you learn what intimacy is between a couple if you don't learn it in your own home? You don't learn the details, but you learn everything except the details. You learn how people wink at each other, right? Kitzat ayin, libo gasp, but, you know, these are terms that you find in the Gemara. The idea of emotional intimacy, the idea of communication. So all of that, we have to find a way that subsystem can be given privilege as something that the children know about and want to give privilege to, and are better off if it's working well without sitting in the room while the parents discuss it. That's something that we have 3 years to try to figure out how to do that in the Haredi culture. The issue is there. It's just going to be done in a different way. But you see, as soon as you deal with the spouse system, what have you done to the perverse triangle? You've kicked Claudia out of it, right? You're dealing on the same hierarchical level, and you no longer have a perverse triangle. So making the subsystem work also opens up the perverse triangle. Moshe?
I don't understand the difficulty for a Haredi family versus another family. It means,
You tell me.
meaning, I understand you can't discuss the specifics of marital relations, but why that? Why would it? I mean, that's just that's a natural result out of a man and woman having an intimate connection. So if you can discuss, usually the problems are not figuring out exactly how to do it, but rather how to get close.
Right.
And so why can't you discuss with the kids what happens, so say, the parents' complications in relating to each other, or
You tell me. What I said to you is that the way family therapy started, it didn't continue that way in all cultures either, but the way family therapy started, Moshe, the therapist, will say to David, switch seats with me, I'm going to sit with your kids, and while I sit with them, discuss what you'd rather be doing at 2 in the morning if you didn't have to worry about Claudia. If that suits your families, then you're talking the same language. I kind of doubt it, because even non-Haredi families found that a little problematic for the children to be in the room when it was discussed. So what do? You make a bigger boundary, and you go, but you tell me.
no, but that has to do with Haredi meaning religious or because of cultural. It means any kind of therapeutic intervention will make your client uncomfortable in that level, which means, I assume didn't it make non-Haredi people very uncomfortable, and they're probably very resistant. I know they probably put out the videos of the people that were resistant, but I'm sure there were probably people that were resistant.
Right. Okay. So the ball is up in the air. Let's see what you have to say. Love it.
I think there's a difference between...
It's not Parsha Samon. It's the day after, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I think there's a difference between feeling uncomfortable and then there are certain issues which, whether it's culture or something like that, it's taboo. Taboo is very different than bringing up something that's going to make somebody uncomfortable. These things sort of are more than a lightning rod. It's like not allowed to be in the room at all.
What do people think?
It could be a cultural thing. I agree with him that that different cultures might have their taboos, but I don't think that's the same thing as bringing up something that's difficult to sit through.
Eunice.
Why does it have to be taboo to just not bring it up? If certain things are just not discussed, it doesn't have to be taboo, it's just a boundary that we just don't discuss it. Why does that make it taboo?
Well, there's a reason why it's not being discussed.
What
It
is
could be there's another reason.
But taboo makes it like, if it was brought, taboo looks very rigid and...
Well, and then what I'm thinking of is the bedroom in the Haredi culture. That's what I view as pretty taboo.
I don't see a difference between taboo and something that's uncomfortable. I don't know what the difference is. Like for me, I've had the pleasure of learning from a lot of my friends here, different things that I discuss that they don't discuss. And so I don't know. I understand what Dr. Flashman is saying.
Okay. Eunice?
I'm saying, respond, I feel like I'm in my association. To me, taboo is like if a child would bring up a family member or a relative you don't speak to. Taboo to me is rigid, we don't talk about it, we don't discuss it. To me, it's a not safe association. People shut down. To me, the difference is we don't talk about certain things just because we don't, but if it came up, it would be dealt with delicately and it would be handled. It's just, we don't talk about certain things.
Okay.
I grew up in a very umbrella Christian world, and I almost feel like it's more hidden there than it is in the Haredi world. I feel like in the
Go ahead, talk a little bit slower.
Sure. I feel like it's more taboo in the secular umbrella Christian world than it is in the Haredi world, because I feel like in the Haredi world everything is laid out for you. I feel like what you learn in the Torah as a kid in the Haredi world versus what you would learn in the Christian Bible school is very I feel like they really watered it down in the Christian world. So
Okay.
I don't know how you would apply that to them, but I think it's kind of
Right. So the ball's up in the air. It's an interesting question. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that even if you take children completely out of the picture. Like even if someone is just working with a couple in the Haredi community, I think it's still a very difficult topic to bring up. Like I feel like couples are very, very uncomfortable with a therapist asking
Right.
about this. So like, I'm saying even if the kids aren't there, it's difficult.
Okay. That's also, that would fall more in the cultural probably, but there will be a class, it'll be the last class of the 3 years, there'll be a semester on sexual dysfunction, which, why do we put it last? Well, that's why you put it last, so we put it first. And then in trilogy we put it first because it's more interesting, but we put it last because the idea is that, you need to be pretty well versed in how to handle everything else in order to be able to work with that. But that's certainly an interesting question. That would
Two questions. What do you think, let's say it was a secular couple, what do you think the effects for the children would be? And if they were very comfortable and they wanted to talk about it and you thought differently, would you intervene or would you try and?
Right. So here, you see, we're getting to the issue of function, right? In other words, the subsystems, we want to know how the spouse subsystem works. Now, you say, well, what's the boundary? The boundary is the next concept we're going to talk about, but you mentioned it. What should be the place of the children at the point where the couple discusses their problems with physical intimacy, right? What should be the place? Now, a boundary can be outside of the room. It can be the couple is in Great Neck and the children are in Israel. It's a big boundary. It can be a boundary that just be quiet and let us talk. But why shouldn't you learn how men and women talk to each other? How are you going to learn? Now, that's the range, right? In a given family, I think what the therapist has to do is to find what works in that family. That's why, when I was telling you about Venusian not doing well with the women's critique of family therapy, they said, how do you know what works in a family? What makes you decide you have to be here, you have to be there? You can check and see. Clinically, what you would probably do is to say, the two of you, the subsystem, you need to have a place where you can talk about your relationship. Now, what place would that be? How could we make that work? And let's say the couple would say, to tell you the truth, the presence of the children makes us so uncomfortable that it shuts us down, right? So then you say, well, how can the boundary between the children and the parents support the function of the subsystem of the spouse system? So they're saying, let's work out it this way. And then the kids say, no, we want to be here, which is a hierarchical problem, because the parents decide where the kids are. And so the parents will say, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start our conversation by ourselves. Once we're more comfortable with each other, then we will decide what to share with you about it, about how we solved it and what was important, but not the first step. The first step, your presence here, is making it impossible for us to move. So then you have a hierarchical or a boundary problem, which is not protecting the subsystem function, right? Now, another couple would say, the truth is that we have a small apartment, or let's say we have a Japanese apartment. The walls are made out of paper. Japanese learn not to hear things. But we have a Japanese apartment, everybody hears everything. Who are we fooling? They hear what goes on, and so it's better, instead of imagining it, that they see how we resolve things. You want to teach them that. As a therapist, would I say you can't do that? I don't think I would. I would say, let's try it and see how it works on both sides.
How about if you had a sense already that the children were uncomfortable?
No, then we would check with the children and see if the children feel that, because, children can filter things. Let's say, children can stay in the room and not hear anything. Just try to tell them what they're supposed to do. They sit in the room and don't hear anything. So children are good at filtering. So it depends, but you would check. See, the siblings, the children are also a subsystem, which means that they need to be safe from being overexposed to adult things that they don't know what to do with, right? So you would check the two subsystems and see how they function, and if they function, then the family has found its way of trying the next step. The next step is that the woman says to the man something, and the room explodes. Okay, well, we tried that, and let's try something else.
So I'm curious, once the children are exposed, so like, is there a place, I don't know if this doesn't sound therapeutic, but is there a place to say like certain things just aren't discussed? And like that's the boundary, that you could be curious, you could be wondering.
Right. Now here, let's just take the word taboo for a minute and try to bring it into context. Taboo is, the word taboo is used in multicultural failure, right? When I use the word taboo, I'm not talking about my culture. I'm talking about Yemen's culture. I'm saying that they can't talk about that, and in some ways I'm critical of that. So I call it a taboo as if it's a primitive culture which isn't enlightened, and so they have this taboo, but I actually, not trying to understand it, I'm basically being critical of it. That's where the word taboo is used in English discussion. So usually people don't talk about their own culture and the taboo, they talk about somebody else's culture. And the taboo in my culture, it's not comfortable, it doesn't work, or you can say it's usher. So usher isn't the same as taboo, because that's our culture, right? But then you have to ask your question, so what is usher? Who decides what's usher, and in which kind of Haredi community where the decisions are made? Are they made at home? Are they made by the Rav? Are they made by the Rebbe? Are they made by the grandparents? Who decides, right? But taboo is what you use to criticize somebody else's culture. And in our culture, the question is, what are the guidelines? What are the guidelines? Also would be a question of guidelines. It's not something that you can't because you'll freak out. You can't because you're not supposed to. That's a different story. The ball is up in the air, right?
I would exchange the word also of sacred. And if I'm in the culture and I don't call it taboo, I would say it's sacred. It's between the couple. It should be like that. So I'm saying this, using the right languages makes a big difference. I mean, for me.
Well, see, now raising a different word, right? Instead of saying it's taboo, you're not allowed to hear from it. It sounds like it's a bad thing. Taboo is like, no one does taboo
sacred that we
this.
just keep it between us. This is how it's supposed to be.
Right, so that would be the spouse subsystem agreeing on something that's right for them, right? Without having to justify it, right? And to say that we talk about that by ourselves, and if they use the word sacred for it, then they're giving privilege to a positive aspect of what goes on between husband and wife in their discussion, right? And so when you say, the whole idea of sacred, kadosh is a boundary. Kadosh means, krushim. It's separate. It's separated out. So this is separate, and this is how we are. And if the kids accept it, now you see, when the kids accept it, you could say they're accepting a hierarchy. A hierarchy is the parents say it, the kids accept it. Or you could say we're making a boundary, which is the parents suggest it, and the kids accept it and say, we're happy with that too. We would like it to be a cultural value that what happens between a man and a woman stays just between them. And so nobody else is privileged, is present in it. And that's how we see our culture, and that's how we see how we want things to be. Eunice?
So now that you switched the words, like if parents don't want to discuss finances with their children or this topic, and the children don't accept it, all of a sudden it's considered taboo? Like why, certain things,
Right.
to me taboo sounds negative, so I'm saying certain things are just sacred or not their business, frankly.
Right. So then you would say, the bank account is sacred. In some societies in America, the bank account is the most sacred thing in our culture, right? So you can say, but the couple could say, if they said, look, we don't want the kids to know our financial business because we don't trust them, because they'll tell the neighbors. So then you have a serious problem of communication.
But they don't want to burden them with their financial.
Or you can say you don't burden them, but not to burden them is not a hierarchical question. Not to burden them is a parental decision, but the boundary between the parents and the children would be negotiated. You would say, how do we know that it burdens them? Let's see if it burdens them. The kids may say, we don't want to know. Let's say it's a very wealthy family. So there's enough. There's not a problem of enough. It's a question of where to invest and what, what building to sell and what building to buy in Baltimore, Los Angeles, whatever. It's a wealthy family. The kids say, we don't want to know about it. So if that works for the kids and for the parents, then the parents might say, well, for now, why should you need to know about it? But at some point it's yours. So, we'd like you to know about it at some point, so we'll negotiate it. So you're negotiating a boundary. But if you say children can't know about money, which is more common when there's not so much money, children can't know what the troubles are because it would burden them, and we don't want to worry them. You see how it works. You see if
So basically, if the child doesn't accept the boundary, you have to be negotiating, even if it's a topic that you don't feel isn't their place.
because the boundary makes the subsystem work. That's the question. It's not whether the boundary is good or bad, which is like Mnuchin did it, which is more or less like saying, how is it like my family's boundaries? But does it work in your family? In other words, the children could say, look, you don't want us to worry about the money, but when you come home, we look at your face, and we don't know if you're angry at me or at your boss or at the paycheck. And so that's confusing to us. And if we knew what your worries were, then we could put those aside, or we could even figure out as children what we could do to be helpful. But all we ever do is fight. When we say, give me, and you say, no, there isn't. And that's not a discussion, right? So there, the family would be using that issue, and instead of calling money hierarchical, you would say, wait a minute, it's hierarchical, but it doesn't service the functions of the subsystems, because the children are not learning, and as a result there's a confusion. There's confusion between emotional systems and hierarchical systems. Yeah?
You keep on mentioning checking and seeing the subsystem of the children, but there's always the first step, and you don't know. Maybe I don't remember correctly, I don't think in the Bryce family, I don't think when they started, I don't think Carl didn't seem to me that he checked for the children. He just moved them into talking about it.
Right.
I'm wondering, like, how did he make, was it a cultural call, this is how we do it in California in those days, or
was
it beyond that?
Das ist gewesen so Yamo. That's family therapy started with the idea, family therapy was at the same time simultaneous with what in America was called the sexual revolution, which was connected with the fact that sexual matters aren't taboo, that people are supposed to learn about them. And in America, the people should do whatever they want. That was America. So under those circumstances, family therapy began with that kind of pressure. And that's what informs your question of, does the therapist push for it? Nobody does anymore. There you would say, maybe Whitaker was right, because maybe he understood that in the context, it was the Midwest there, but in the context up in Michigan, where Ann Arbor's is like the East Coast, right? It's a pretty enlightened place. Things were going that way. And for the Bryce family to say, oh, it's taboo, was out of sync with their culture. And they were using it in a way that the kids found to be exclusive and for no justifiable reason. So then, in some ways, the therapist takes upon himself something of a cultural mediator. And how much of a cultural mediator? You, in Whitaker's role, and many people since then, would say, listen, here's the deal. Your kids are being exposed to the sexual revolution, and you say that you can't talk about sex. How does that work, right? Instead of that, he did it for them, but that was in a certain context. But you can always negotiate it, because the therapist is also doing something to suggest cultural possibilities. But you have to remember that if you dysregulate too much, the family will rebound and say, you are out of here. We're not talking about sex, this therapy is over. We're finished, you don't respect our family, which means basically you're breaking the regulation and putting us in danger, right? So it's always better to negotiate it, and in these situations, it's always better to take small steps that allow another step than to try to take 2 steps and end up 3 steps backwards. But that doesn't mean the therapist should be afraid of the family. It means that he's negotiating with them and let's try it this way, let's see how it works, and so forth. So I think you got the idea, but you see, by doing subsystems, what are we doing Flash Yad, what are we always doing? Breaking the perverse triangle. We're not working with the triangle, but it always interrupts the perverse triangle. Yeah.
The thing is, like before a family gets to therapy, let's say something's not working, but they don't know. Let's say a kid worries about money or his family relations. If it's a topic they don't talk about, you'll never know if it's not working.
Right.
So they'll never bring it up and you'll never really know. So there's certain things that cannot be working, you won't know.
Right. So the question is, what do you do about taboos in the family, where something's not working, but it's because there's no communication? And if there's no communication, those secrets always open up. In other words, if the therapist is curious about how things work, then you can be curious about just about anything. You see, you can say, well, I suppose that we don't talk here about the sexual relations between the couple in bed. So you said, no, we don't talk about it, but the issue is on the table. And then you see how people respond, and they say, oh, no, we never talk about that. And then you say, well, that must be very important. Now, the issue could be, you never talk about money. The issue could be, you never talk about what Dad did in school. The issue might be why we never talk to your uncle, right? That could be the issue. But when you say, this is something we never talk about, I got the feeling, you see what a therapist does, he sort of trips over things. It's always a good thing to trip over things. Say, oops, I tripped, right? But then the matter is on the table, right? Say, oh, well, we don't talk about Uncle Jack. Okay, we don't talk about Uncle Jack. Oh, that's very important not to talk about Uncle Jack, very important. So it must be a very important matter. And so how do we know about the matter when we don't talk about it? How do you guys do that? And then you see the issue is opened up. And then the family negotiates with you whether they're too dysregulated or not. So that brings me to let me just go into the boundaries and then we'll make one last point. See, when we deal with the boundaries, for example, Claudia is what Medushin calls a hold-on. She's a person. I told you, don't use that term. But she's a person. She has her boundaries too. There may be aspects of her life that it's nobody else's business, right? And so those things, we want to protect the boundaries of Claudia being able, at the age of 15, 16, to be able to have her own boundaries. And we're talking about the boundaries of the other subsystems. And so the therapist may say to Claudia, I suppose there's some things you'd want to talk about by yourself. And she says yes, and then we check the boundaries. We say, well, how does that work in this family? Would it be okay for David and Caroline that Claudia have some time to discuss things that she wants to keep to herself? And they would say as parents, no, we're her parents. There's no such thing. If she keeps it from us, we can't feel that we're her parents. So what have we had? We've protected the boundary, but we've destabilized the function of one of the subsystems. So that needs to be worked out. Why is it that if you don't know everything about her, then you don't feel that you're her parents? Is that the job of parents to know everything about a child? And is that the job of the child to have everything about her known by her parents? And so what do you start to do? Negotiate the boundary. You know, how do you negotiate the boundary? You say, well, when Claudia was 2 years old, I suppose, right, that she thought that Mom knew everything that was going on, and that Mom thought she knew everything that was going on. They were probably both right. Let's hope so. That's how it is when you're 2 years old. So now you're 15 years old, 13 years have passed. Should it be the same? When you're 25, should it be the same? In other words, how are we going to make this thing grow so that Claudia has room for a boundary that makes her subsystem of being an adolescent girl work and have her parents feel that they're being her parents? So it's a subsystem that functions, yeah.
How would you deal with a situation if a child or even one of the parents is demanding so much space for themselves, so much personal space that the therapist feels like it's unhealthy?
Right, so why would the therapist feel that it's unhealthy? Now, that's an interesting question. The issue of the health of the adolescent is going to be the first topic next semester. In other words, we're going to spend 2 sessions just talking about adolescence because these problems are central in adolescence, and because Barbara spent a semester talking about children but not adolescents. So we're going to spend some time talking about adolescence. But let's just think for a minute about, so I say to myself, what do you gain and what do you lose by having Caroline know nothing about you, right? So even though you set a boundary that's rigid, and then we ask about the subsystems. How is it for you as a subsystem, as a developing adolescent, and how is it for your parents that have no idea how to talk to you?
They don't care about their parents. I mean, teenagers couldn't care less. They want their.
Well, what's it?
I feel like a teenager couldn't care less about that question. Like
That-
they want their space. They don't care what the parents think. You know?
Right. See, now that is an old myth, that healthy adolescents want nothing to do with their parents. And that is actually something of a myth, because healthy adolescents want to renegotiate the boundary with their parents. If the parents can't renegotiate the boundary with the adolescent, then the adolescent sets up a more and more rigid boundary, because they don't know how to have anything to do with their parents, but not everything to do with their parents, right? So what you'll see is that the usual case, but not the exclusive case, is that parents are running after their kids saying, what you do, what you do, what you do, and the kid is running away from the parent. But if you stop that running away, what you see is that the kid is awfully lonely, feeling that they don't have any guidance, and feeling that something's broken. In other words, that we weren't able to negotiate a new boundary, so all I could do is set up this rigid boundary. And then what does my mother do in return? Protects herself by setting up a rigid boundary, saying, I don't care what you do. And then the adolescent girl is awfully lonely, right? So that's not exactly health. And so what you say to an adolescent girl, that's how it feels now, isn't it? See, when we're empathic with people in systems, is not saying you're right. Nobody's right. Everybody's right, and nobody's right. In other words, everybody is holding one part of the system. Nobody's right, because nobody is the whole system. We're talking about a group of people. Nobody's right in a group, right? It's the group that can be right, when it's working. One way of looking at it is to say the subsystems are functioning. So you can say to the girl, you sure need room for mom right now, and it might be that way for a while. I have to say, I would hope for you that we can find a way that you could feel a lot safer with your mom, working with you, working with your mom, working with the whole Bryce family. That's what happened to Claudia and Caroline, right? They were complete loggerheads. And Claudia was miserable. She was missing her mother. Could she say, gee, I really want to have a mother? She could only say the exact opposite. So what's healthy? What's healthy is what grows. And what's healthy, what grows is what grows between people. In other words, you put wheels on the system. Claudia and Caroline they put stakes in the ground and said, this is how it is. You're no good, you're no good. Okay. That's how we start. How do you put wheels onto that? How do you make that start to move? How do you start to say, this is so painful, and this isn't the way that it's going to stay, but we're going to take some small steps and see how we're going to move it. And see, so then you say that Claudia is a subsystem, that's how you need it now, but you're in movement, and so is your mother. And then a lot of times, I think I mentioned last time, the therapist, empathy means you have a better view of the client than the client has of themselves, right? You can sort of see how it might be better. So that a lot of times when you're talking about the boundaries, the therapist is imagining how these boundaries could grow, how they could be negotiated together. But a boundary is not a limit. Limit is the word for hierarchy, one-sided. Boundary is something that's mutual. And actually, since we started this whole course with mutual creation, you can see that the boundary is the precise opportunity for mutual creation. You say to Claudia and Caroline, I'd like you to try to talk to each other about the price of tea in China for 5 minutes. Just, actually it turns out that the price of tea in China these days is no small matter of global economy to say it, but the price of tea in China once wasn't so low. Just to see if you could do something different, but only for 5 minutes. And so you push them to do something together, and you create a different boundary. And they both feel, maybe we could talk about what time Claudia comes home at night instead of the price of tea in China. And we'd also find a way to look at each other and co-create, do something that feels like it's moving us ahead. Now, one last thing about, yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I'm a bit stuck with this hold on, I don't understand the term, this hold on.
A hold on is a person. It's a lousy term. Mnuchin made it up because he was trying to be consistent with a way of thinking that is not consistent with living systems. In other words, von Bertalanffy's theories of living systems is about living systems which do not have consciousness. Once you put in consciousness, it doesn't work. But Mnuchin imported this way of thinking, and as a theory, it's weak. The Bowen system is a much better theoretical way. So Bowen had to find a way, when talking about systems, to talk about a person. What could be a person? You can't be a person. See, the whole problem with family therapy started with if you're only dealing with the group, what happens to the individual, right? And living systems theory, which does not deal with conscious living systems, doesn't have a place for the individual, right? So
Why is that, why is Claudia, what's the sign?
that's her boundary. The yellow is the boundary around her.
That she's only for herself and nothing else?
That's one subsystem. You see, it's not that Claudia now is not part of a family, but she's a subsystem of the family as an individual. Put it this way, you all know, right? You're part of a family. You don't have your own thoughts and feelings, some of which you don't share. Everybody shares everything in every family. Those are boundaries that are, right?
So everyone really in the family has their own subsystem.
Everybody's a whole lot, absolutely. I just, we made Claudia a whole lot because it was easier but for the slide. But no, you're right, everybody can be also an individual. Now,
I don't understand what you said about pushing the boundaries, that it's an ingredient for co-creation.
A boundary is created from the two sides of the boundary. In other words, Caroline is one side of the boundary, and Claudia is the other side of the boundary. What goes on between the two of them is not, if you talk about hierarchy, Caroline tells Claudia, I'm your mother, you do what I say. Huh? If you're talking about the boundary between them, Caroline and Claudia negotiate together. Claudia says to Caroline, when you were 15, your mother told you what to do. In other words, how am I going to be 15? How am I going to work this out? Me and you, how are we going to work it out together? A boundary is a place for mutual creation. You say, well, when I was 10, I listened to you. When I was 11, I listened, I didn't take it too seriously. When I was 12, I started to have some questions. And now I'm 13 and I'm saying, this isn't working anymore. And Carolyn says, of course it's not working. I'm older, you're older. I haven't been a mother of a 13-year-old before. Rarely do you hear that from a parent, but in the most healthy families, that's exactly what you hear. And you should learn from them and say, well, how am I supposed to know how to raise a 13-year-old daughter except how my mother raised me? And either that wasn't so great, or you're not me. So I've never raised you. I've never been your mother when you're 13. And so being 13, you have something to teach me about who you are and how your boundaries work. And if I were to say it in a different way, and not only limits, you come home at 2. If I would say to you, Claudia, I worry a lot about you at 2 o'clock, and these are the things I worry about you. And I think about you a lot, and I think that you can probably negotiate it, but not yet. I can see it coming in another 2 years, but not yet. Then Claudia may say, oh, there's hope, we can grow, the boundary is alive, we're co-creating, and so I don't have to, come home at 2 in the morning now, because I see that Mama's going to see that that's something that I do when I'm 17. So we have a 5-year range to figure this out.
What was the example that you gave? They sit down and they talk about whatever.
What?
They sit down together and talk about whatever. I don't know.
Oh, the tea in China? Just to be able to talk about something and appreciate that they have 2 different views about something or other. Anything. It could be about,
And that's what? Demonstrating the boundaries between them?
That's creating, that's co-creation. But it can be a boundary in the sense of different ways of looking at things, but you can still talk about it. You can talk about, for
By
example...
having them sit down and talk about anything, you're showing them that there are boundaries and they can still co-create.
It was just an example, it's not a perfect example. I want to go on, so leave that aside. Now, there's two important things that I still want to add. Hold on a second. Okay. About before, and then hold your questions, we'll get to them. The first is that this is the Venusian theory. There's either boundaries, people say boundaries is the main issue, because families are defined by boundaries that are either open or rigid or normals in the middle. Okay, the middle, if it's even, we would say that's what the philosopher says at the beginning of Horos Halavavos. This is Aristotle, which Maimonides thought a great deal of, that everything is in the middle, right? That boundaries are too rigid or too open, and in the middle is good. The women said, you mean the way it was in your family, that's in the middle? But that's the Venusian system. So if you have open boundaries, you push them to the norm. If you have rigid boundaries, you push them to the norm. However, if you look at the Bowen system of differentiation of self and system, there isn't any normal. There's no middle. The Bowen system is one that's moving towards something always, right? That the differentiation will be 10%, 50%. He says the best it gets is 80%. There's always more to move. So there's never a point where you have, if you look at the middle, you say, well, that's sort of that's kind of regulation, isn't it? You get to the middle and whereas the Bowen system is one of growth, but there's always more to do. There's always some other thing that hasn't been co-created, but there's still place to go. If you want, this is Aristotle, and the Bowen system is more Plato. In Plato, there's always further way to go. Has anybody ever decided the halacha is like Aristotle or Plato? No, they're two sides of human experience. But if you look at the boundary issue and do it this way, you take the normal and you tweak it. You pick up the line with the middle, you pick it up in the middle, like that, and you turn it like that. You can make Venusian into Bowen's tail, right? In other words, that here are the boundaries that are too open or too rigid. What does that mean, too open or too rigid? It means that they don't allow for differentiation, right? That the boundaries are such that there's no place for co-creation. And so what you want to do is to find the kind of boundaries that service the function of the subsystems, which is co-creation, right? So that it would look like this, that, and this is what Bowen's system says, that in low differentiation, there are two ways of doing low differentiation. Cut off, which are rigid boundaries, or the undifferentiated ego mass or the enmeshed family, two open boundaries. Why are they too rigid or too open? Functionally, they're too far apart, or too one inside the other, to allow for room for co-creation. But the point is not to get the right boundary. The point is to get a boundary that allows differentiation to grow. As a result, we're never dealing with a balanced system. That's regulation, right? We're never dealing with getting the boundary right and then everything is fine. The truth is, Venusian never does it, but he says he does, because he has a limiting system of thinking. But what we want to do is create the kind of boundaries that service the subsystem function, which is co-creation. It's the possibility of having differentiation grow. You see the difference there? So it's not as if you'll see the boundaries. When you see the boundaries, think Bowen, don't think Venusian. You think Venusian, you try to correct the boundaries instead of helping people to get to the kind of closest that works for them and allows them to grow. That's the first point. The second point, and then we'll have time for questions, is the following. Husband comes home. This is an American family, right? Husband comes home and says, today the soup is good. Now, in a spouse subsystem, communication is not like a telegraph. There was once a theory that communication is telegraphic. I have something to say, and if I get it right, if I say it precisely enough, the telegraph goes and you get it. You know exactly what I meant. Communication is not that way. Communication between people who live together and functions is open. In other words, today the soup is good could mean I love you. It could mean what's it going to cost me. And it could mean anything in the middle, right? It could mean,
That
I
usually
love
it's
you,
not
I will
good.
help you cook. It could mean, you usually don't bother, it's just the day that you gave me soup, but I'll take crumbs from the table. It could be, you finally cook like my mother. It could be, I suppose if it's good, my mother cooked it, right? And it could be, today the soup is good, but who knows what's happening tomorrow. So now that is a range. And what I'm suggesting is that is the range. In other words, that when you say, wow, it's good soup today, that between that couple can mean that whole range. So who decides what it means? Who decides what it means? And the answer is that it's mutually created. In other words, in a couple system, the wife hears today the soup is good and says, I love you too. That's what it means. They've created that meaning. In other words, they decided to make that the meaning because she took it from a possible meaning, right? Possible meaning, but chose to make it that. Whereas she could also hear today the soup is good if she's in a kind of crummy mood. And she says, and I'm not expecting anything. I just made the soup. Don't get out your wallet, So they're going to be in the, now, is he going to accept that? He might, because it's there, right? It's a possibility. That's how people get in and out of trouble, because language and communication is something that, when you say the soup is good today, you're opening up a range. You're not sending a telegram. So if the wife says to the man, do you mean? So now you've just created what I mean, right? Because I could have meant I love you, and I could have meant I don't trust you, and it could have meant anything in the middle, and it could have brought in my mother or your mother, so it could be a triangle. Take it how you want to take it. That's how communication is co-created. So there's a range, and a lot of times in therapy, what you do is you take communications and you have people choose. Now, when she's choosing the meaning, is she perverting his meaning? She's choosing from possible meanings, because communication has a range, right? And now, one way to understand the enmeshed family or the disengaged family is as follows. Here's the enmeshed family. He says, today the soup is good, and she says, you're always criticizing me about yesterday and tomorrow, right? And he says, it wasn't good yesterday, it won't be good tomorrow. But they can't choose the other range. In other words, they limit their range to only one possibility. That's where you can't grow. You can't co-create if you can't choose within the range. So choosing within the range when it's limited to only one possibility, that's what you'll see within meshed families. I know what you mean. I know what you mean, which actually means I'm choosing what you mean, and you're choosing to choose what I do, and we're stuck. This is no good. This could have been I love you, and it's not working. So in a meshed family, people mind read. They know what each other, and as a result, they can't create from the range of meaning, which is a normal function of speech. And the enmeshed family, the disengaged family, is that this is, she says, all you care about is the soup, and not about me. And so that wasn't in the range. That isn't one of the things that he possibly could have meant. He didn't say, I don't care about you. He didn't mean, but she reads it as a different meaning that was possibly in his, and then they feel disconnected. See, they feel that they're living in two parallel universes. They're not closing a universe, they're not creating a universe, they're in separate universes. So one way to look at a disengaged family is that she always knows what he means, but it's not what was in the range. If it was in the range, it's more of an enmeshed family. If it's out of the range, then they're not communicating at all. Okay, now it's time for questions. Start with you.
Just put that in the range. If she's constantly choosing the same thing.
I'm sorry, what?
This comment, I care about soup, not you.
Right.
Just stick that into the range. If she constantly chooses to react in that way, then it becomes part of a hostile meaning.
No, what it becomes is no communication. In other words, if it wasn't within his reading, if that's what she says, you only care about soup, he says, you don't care, you're not listening to me. There he can legitimately say, that's not what I mean.
But what's hit, so then she's disengaged and he's not. He's opening the communication.
Yeah, I mean, you're taking it one step further, for sure. Then, so that she has her range and he has his range, this is the simplification. So you could say that at some point he says to himself, I'll eat the soup in silence. Why bother to say anything? I just eat soup. That's what we have together. Soup. We don't talk. So, but you see that they're losing communication. In other words, he's saying, you've imposed what you think on me, so I'm not here, so we're disengaged.
Right, so then he won't say anything next time.
Was that?
Then he will maybe choose not to even comment
Right.
anything,
So,
and then he's really
no,
disengaged.
when
Because he doesn't feel safe.
When Mnuchin created the disengaged family, there was a huge cultural gap. Mnuchin came from Argentina, from a middle-class Jewish family. He spent his time here in Israel learning from the kibbutzim. And then he shows up in New York, or Philadelphia, and deals with the ghetto culture, which is totally unfamiliar to him, of poor people, black and Puerto Rican families. And he created what was called the disengaged family. He took it back in the end. He said, in the end, he said, but you know, when you make a big mistake, you can never take it back. My lesson. So you never take back a big mistake. So he said, look, there's no such thing as a disengaged family. I didn't just understand how they were. And if there is such a thing as a disengaged family, I haven't found anybody who's ever met one. Because, if you recall, when you have a disengaged family, that's the cutoff, a lot of times when the differentiation is very low, you're both cut off and enmeshed. Both happen at the same time. Now, one of Mnuchin's students was working with drug addicts in New York, and he said, well, these drug addicts, you know, they're cut off. They don't care. I don't care what my father thinks. I don't care. I have nothing to do with my family. How often do you call your mother every day? I worked in a methadone clinic. That's how it was. They were presenting themselves having nothing to do with anybody and calling mom. Yeah, it wasn't this. It was, you know, a long time ago. Calling mom every day. They were both cut off and enmeshed. So he said to Mnuchin, I guess they're normal, right? Because they keep going through the middle. And the point is that they have low level of differentiation. And in low differentiation, you don't have to choose. You can be sometimes cut off and sometimes enmeshed, because it's the same point. The point is that instead of co-creating, you're either swallowing each other or turning your backs on each other. Both of them are no co-creation. So there are two ways to avoid co-creation. They're not exclusive. So if you look at human systems and not at non-conscious systems, you see that the boundaries can be both open and closed at the same time, because they both service lower differentiation. And that's the point that Mnuchin didn't understand, and that the idea of talking about the boundary as the main thing, open and closed, is a mistake. It's a theoretical mistake. It's a small one, but an important one. And it's easier to see. You'll find the most difficult families you'll talk to don't care what they're saying to each other and are sure that they know exactly what each other mean. And they can't separate, and they can't, right? And those families, you say to yourself, okay, I'm not going to I don't have a middle to put them in. They're always going through the middle. That's not the point. The point is that the two are afraid to co-create. Yeah.
So, I mean, I assume all families have moments of, what's it called, enmeshment, and moments of, what was the other one? Cut off. But like, let's, like, how do you differentiate? Like, let's say a husband's very critical of that wife's cooking. So it's predictable. So she knows what he's thinking, and she could choose from it. That becomes enmeshment when it's predictable.
If it becomes predictable to the extent there's no room for play. In other words,
Yes, because she knows what he needs.
well, no, she's choosing that's the meaning that she's choosing to impose on him.
No, but let's say she asked him 15 times earlier, what do you need? And he said, yes, it's not as good as yesterday. So the 16th time, it's not that she assumed
But she
it.
kept asking him, instead of saying, do you love me? Right? In other words, she's always choosing that. So if you're choosing it and asking a question or making an exclamation point, it's the same difference.
Wait, I don't understand. If she asks him what his meaning is and he tells her, so that's the answer.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that, you know, if the idea of asking people what they mean is not so robust. We're completely addicted to it in the West. We're completely addicted to the theory of language, which is telegraphic, which is that you sent me a communication, what was in your mind when you sent me the communication? That is not how human communication works. You see it in families all the time, and the more you're sure you're dealing with telegraphic communication, the more unhappy you'll be.
But if someone, a husband or a child makes a broad statement, you want to look at it.
No, but you need to have some No, you need to have some room to create it together. In other words, mom says, if you do that one more time, you go into your room. And you ask the child, what are you hearing? He says, as a matter of fact, Mom, ask him what he's hearing. And he's hearing, I hate you. She says, oh, I don't mean I hate you. I mean, I hate putting you in the room. I don't like putting you in the room, but I feel that I need to. It's, like the Rambam about Kaas, that you pretend to be angry because that's...
Well, isn't it smart for the kid to ask the mother, so what do you mean when you say that?
The child will never ask them. That's what you'll do as a
No, I know,
therapist.
fine, so like a spouse asking
But
another.
see, what happens is the mother says, go to your room. And the child reacts as if she said, I can't stand you. Right? That's not the only thing she means. It's in the range.
Right, but that's why it makes sense, but I don't understand, and why shouldn't you ask them what they mean? When it's such a-
Because it's not what do you mean, but what meanings could we choose together. What meanings we can choose together is one of the most important tools of couples and family therapy. What can this mean? How can you choose what it means? And when there's enmeshment, you close it to one possible meaning. And so when he comes home and there's good soup, he can't say, I love you, right? Because they've eliminated that. But that's a possibility for him. And it's a better possibility for her, but she can't hear it because of God knows what. And so they choose to regulate themselves on, we're talking about soup, right?
No, I'm asking,
Yeah, go ahead, help each other, that's what you're here for.
of Yehudis was saying that, let's say there's a couple, and she's used to 15 times, he means that really the soup wasn't good yesterday, and finally today is good, let's say. And she decides to change and co-create, even without asking what you mean, and she decides today I'm going to just take it as I love you. And she responds to it in a way, instead of, again, projecting and saying, oh, he means that, and that's why I'm going to follow the negativity. I'm going to think, oh, so thank you for the compliment. So she's changing, she's co-creating, even without asking what you mean.
She's offering the co-creation. She's
offering.
offering it.
Now
If
we'll
he
see.
chooses to, then they've co-created.
Yeah, well, fine, so she's making meaning of something that's more part, but what if it was a straight out insult? So she's gonna also just like...
It's her decision, she still has a choice here also.
No, a straight out insult.
Certain things are meaningful in itself, the words.
Let me give you an example. This comes from, what people do in therapy. He comes home and he insults her and says, this is what you have to offer. Goes to the starter. I come home from working and you give me this, right? That's not very nice, right? And she chooses, she's probably been in therapy, then she chooses to say, tell me about your bad day first before you eat the soup. I want to hear about the bad day, right? Because he didn't want to tell her about the bad day, and she didn't want to hear about the bad day, so what do? They're miserable with the soup, right? They're miserable with the soup. So if she chooses to say, because he insults her, he says, I had such a bad day, but the insult always has some communication, some twist, some request, listen to me. Every insult has that, except for the ones that you can't treat. We're not here to treat people that can't be treated, they won't come to us. But where there's possibility of treatment, then in the insult is listen to me. And if it's listen to me, it's because I want you to listen to me. Or it could be, I want to protect you from listening to me. I'm going to insult you, so you won't ask what a bad day it was, because the truth is we're broke, and I'm trying to protect you. So I insult you so that you think that we're talking about the soup, because I don't have money for anything else, right? So all of those possibilities open up when you, as a therapist, before you say, what did you really mean, you say, what could this mean? Where could the communication go? How could it open up? That's what we do most of the time. So we're going to stop at this point, hopefully with continuing questions. The first session next time, the first two sessions we're going to do adolescence, and then we're going to do a general review of all 7 sessions to try to pull us together and move us ahead to the rest of the course. And in the meantime, the blog, I don't mention the blog because I don't really want the blog. You have to understand, it makes me it gives me the creeps to think that you would write on a blog and raise things about things that you haven't understood, because I need to understand that you've understood everything telegraphically, because that's how I communicate. So if you write on a blog, that means that you're not listening to me. So with that,
Is the blog taboo?
was it?
Is the blog taboo?
Apparently, Lamia, no. For you guys, I guess it is. So I don't know
You want
why.
to continue to be on the blog and the breakdown,
What?
and then we have a breakdown, right? So
The blog is your class's blog. You can do whatever you want with it. You can be there talking about this course, you can talk about Barbara's course, you can talk about the course on law, you can talk about what it's like to be here.
we ask questions also from classes
You
that
can
were
ask,
passed.
it's your blog, it's not related, that's what you asked to do, to separate it from the courses and from the lectures and to have it become more general. So that was a wonderful request, which hasn't yet come to be. But maybe it is, if you're
There's
asking.
many things that are not clear to me, and I would like to ask, can I ask the questions on the blog and get answers, like,
There's two things. One is, of course, you can ask the questions of the blog. The other thing that Dina reminded me, and I almost forgot, is all of you were my students. You know, not just for this course. It's my responsibility to worry about your training. So I see the men, you know, on this side. That was your question before in the subgroup. My door is always open, not just to the men. If there are things that are troubling you, or things that you want to say, listen, you know, this or that's bothering me, I have yet to slam the door on anybody, and I'd be more than happy to see all of you to find out how it's going. Okay, let's break into this.
So I'll just make another announcement, because we're sort of coming to the end of the first semester. So this is the time of year with all of you and your supervisors that you're going to be starting a process of mid-year evaluations with all of your supervisors. And part of the process of the mid-year